Hi, this is Michael Jacobi. I just returned to the Chicago area after a wonderful trip to the UK. Thanks to the British Tarantula Society, I was invited to deliver the after-dinner presentation at the 18th Annual BTS Lectures and Dinner held at the Aztec Hotel and Spa in Bristol, England on March 14, 2020. I first presented at these lectures 13 years ago, and it was a pleasure to return to chronicle my 3-year adventure chasing tarantulas, scorpions, and snakes in the American Southwest, which came to an end in late 2019. I thank my dear friends Mark and Kim Pennell, who are also the co-hosts of the lectures, for not only a stellar event and a wonderful week in their Bristol hometown, but also for an amazing 3-day visit to Scotland after the lectures. My stepfather Joel and I had an incredible time in the UK, thanks to Mark and Kim and the BTS. I must also again thank the entire BTS committee for inviting me to be the banquet speaker and making my trip possible. Although my live presentation was filmed, I decided that I would instead do this narrated version for public release on behalf of the British Tarantula Society. This will hopefully allow me to present the material more concisely and also add some details that I neglected to mention during my extemporaneous lecture. I am recording this in suburban Chicago on the 1st of April 2020, still in quarantine due to my overseas travel and isolated due to stay-at-home orders. Before I begin, I want to let viewers know that originally the intention was to only release this recording to paid-up members of the Society. Throughout the almost 2 decades that the lectures and dinner have been held, the Society has not released recordings of lectures even to the membership. They always felt that these special presentations were exclusively for attendees of the event itself. It is only because of this strange time, when many of us are in isolation, that the BTS has graciously decided to allow this video to be publicly released. I ask that you consider membership in the Society and/or making a small donation using the links here, which are also in the video description. The BTS made my trip possible, and I encourage you to support them in their efforts to not only put on 2 first-class events, the lectures, and the incredible exhibition that usually takes place in May, but also to publish the premier arachnocultural journal. Overseas members who can't afford a full membership and receive the print journal by mail can save by signing up for a digital-only membership where they receive the journal via PDF download. But as I said, there is also a donate link here for members and non-members alike. Please consider sending a few quid or dollars in support of the BTS to thank them for the production and public release of this presentation. I also want to highly recommend that you consider attending this wonderful event in future years. The lectures weekend is without a doubt the best way to socialize with international leaders in arachnology and arachnoculture. The evening before social at the host hotel is legendary, and throughout that evening and the following day of the lectures, you have a chance to speak with some of the world's great scientists, travelers, tarantula hunters, breeders, and hobbyists. As you can see in this photo, this year we had 67 attendees at the lectures, and the Society would love to see you add to that number in the future. It is the event of the year for arachnid enthusiasts, and for those of you in the US and elsewhere, a holiday you'll never forget. The 18th annual lectures were absolutely fabulous. As an honorary member of the BTS, it was particularly gratifying to follow the afternoon's fascinating lectures by 2 other honorary members who are good mates of mine, Paul Carpenter and Andrew Smith. Here you see the full roster of lecturers and the titles of their presentations. The afternoon kicked off with Mark Pennell showing the group photographs from each of the previous years. Then our first speaker was Emma Lawler, who spoke about barcoding, something I will reference briefly later in my presentation. It was her first lecture, and although nervous, she did a fabulous job explaining how small sequences of DNA can be used to catalog species without the need for the more expensive and laborious process of using the full genome. It is a very useful tool, but it does have limitations, and I will try my best to explain that in context much later in this presentation. Next, my friend Paul Carpenter presented a talk about fieldwork on tarantulas on 2 islands off the coast of West Africa. He was accompanied on this trip by his brother Mark and another dear friend of mine, Guy Tansley, both of whom I've enjoyed the company of on field trips to exotic locales, and also by Rolf Koenen and another honorary member of the BTS, African tarantula expert Richard Gallen. Paul was followed by yet another man I'm honored to call a friend. Ray Hale and his wife Angela are now doing tours in Indonesia, lecturing via boat cruises. Ray has a passion for the works of British naturalist and co-discoverer of natural selection, Alfred Russel Wallace. His presentation focused on the Wallace line and the distribution of species on either side of this fascinating faunal boundary. Then the afternoon lectures were completed in grand style by my dear mate and legendary arachnohistorian Andrew Smith, who shared some history and tales of his recent field trip to India, accompanied by Guy Tansley and Dr. Stuart Longhorn, which will of course be chronicled in an upcoming documentary available through his lovetarantulas.com. After Andrew's fabulous talk, the room was cleared briefly so that Ray Hale and Peter Kirk could set up to do a little comedy sketch, which we all enjoyed before we left for the afternoon to prepare for the evening dinner and my lecture. I linked the video of their skit in the video description below. Back to the day's lectures briefly. I have been fortunate to travel the world in pursuit of tarantula spiders with both Paul Carpenter and Andrew Smith, both of whom delivered lectures on field trips that included Guy Tansley, another mate who has been part of my visits to places like Suriname and Sri Lanka. Paul and Andrew served the BTS for many, many years, and I first joined them in 2006 on a field trip to Costa Rica, which is documented by a two-part series on my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel also has a documentary on Guy, Paul, Andrew, and I finding the Goliath tarantula in Suriname in late 2012. It was a pleasure to see these three friends and hear of their more recent field work. But my presentation at the 18th lectures was not about foreign lands, but rather about a return to my roots in my homeland. Going back to the early 80s, I would make road trips to seek the tarantulas of the US, primarily in Texas, including a memorable 1984 trip with unknown but pioneering American tarantula breeder Ralph Henning of Joliet, Illinois, to meet up with Stanley and Marguerite Schultz, authors of the infamous Tarantula Keeper's Guide, which was then only in its first printing. However, keeping and breeding and selling exotic tarantulas for some 30 years, and then a decade of overseas field trips to see gorgeous spiders like Megaphobema messamalis in Costa Rica, and my favorite tarantula of all, Poeciliferaris obfusca in Sri Lanka, admittedly made me neglect the tarantulas of the USA. My recent 3-year field trip, which focused on the arachnids and reptiles as well as wildlife photography, changed all that. I developed a passion for the tarantulas of America, especially those that inhabit the Sky Island mountain ranges of Arizona and nearby New Mexico. So this presentation, The Tarantulas of the USA with a focus on the Sky Islands of Arizona and new species, tells the tale of 3 years in the mountain islands and the surrounding desert and grassland seas of the American Southwest. And it also introduces new species discovered along with American arachnologist Dr. Brent E. Hendrickson, including the very special montane spider seen here on the hand of my friend Wyatt Mendez. This tarantula will be described this year, and it will be forever associated with me. Here you see Dr. Hendrickson and I having a beer in a Whole Foods market bar near Tucson. Brent is a good friend of mine, and much of the information contained herein is based on the 340-page revision of Aphonopelma he co-authored with another friend, Dr. Chris Hamilton, and their mutual advisor, Jason Bond. Much of the field work described in this presentation was undertaken by Brent and I, along with others, including some of his Millsaps College students. This is just one of the student groups that Brent would teach field arachnology and field biology courses to while camping in the American Southwest. You can see Brent at the left and me at the right rear with an enthusiastic mix of students from the Jackson, Mississippi private liberal arts college where Brent is a professor. Over the 3 years I spent in Arizona and New Mexico, Brent would visit both alone and with these classes, and Brent and I would chase not only tarantulas but also scorpions, as his research focuses on both, and he is also photographing all American species of both arachnids for a field guide project he hopes to complete. This photo was taken in the Chiricahua Mountains, where I lived in an RV for 3 years during my adventures in the Southwest. This is Cathedral Vista Point, about a mile from my camp. Brent himself was a speaker at the British Tarantula Society lectures in 2012. Here you see Brent in London next to not only Charles Darwin, but also Dr. Stuart Longhorn on his right and Andrew Smith on his left. This photo is also from the Chiricahua Mountains, but it is an area called the Barfoot Hellespot at about 8,300 feet elevation. It is one of the localities of that special new dwarf high elevation species you saw earlier, and we will talk much more about later. I call this group of tarantula hunters Team Sky Island Tarantulas 2019. In late October 2019, we assembled to spend a week not only in the Chiricahuas, but in other Sky Island ranges that had been little explored and mostly unsampled for endemic tarantula species. On the image left is Chad Campbell of Minnesota, and then Dr. Chris Hamilton. Chris has also spoke at the BTS lectures and attended several years. I first met Chris at ArachniCon in 2006, an event for arachnid enthusiasts that I helped Arachniboard's owners Debbie and Scott Scherer host in San Antonio, Texas for 2 years. As I mentioned earlier, Brent and Chris are the co-authors of the 2016 revision of Aphonopelma tarantulas of the US that is the basis of much of this presentation. I used some of the open source figures and images from that incredible tome herein, and Brent graciously shared other images with me that you will see here. On Chris's left is me, and then Brent, followed by American arachnid breeder Tom Patterson, and finally Wyatt Mendez, whose hand you saw earlier decorated by that special new species. Wyatt is a centipede expert who has quickly become very adept at tarantula fieldwork in the U.S. He grew up where his family lives in Cape Creek Canyon of the Chiricahua Mountains, so we had a Sky Island native on the team. The 6 of us had great fortune in late 2019, not only finding more specimens of that soon-to-be-described new tarantula, which Brent and I first discovered together on Halloween Day 2018, and as I said will be described in 2020, but likely also found other new species in other ranges. You will see these spiders at the end of this presentation. Chris and Brent co-authored this monumental work in 2016, referring to it as a partial revision despite being 340 pages in length. There is a link to download this paper in the video description. The third author is Jason Bond, an advisor they shared at different times, since although Chris and Brent are about the same age, they attended graduate school at different times, and Brent got his PhD and his scientific career off to a start quite some time before Chris. Throughout this presentation, I will be informally referring to this paper, which again, I borrowed figures from for this lecture, most often as Chris and Brent's revision or something similar, rather than the more proper Hamilton et al. 2016. My own publications related to the material began in the first year of my 3-year odyssey. Published in the second issue of volume 32 of the Journal of the British Tarantula Society, my 2017 article is featured in one of the past issues that I produced as editor and designer of the journal. BTS members may access these back issues, and anyone viewing this who isn't a BTS member should join today and access them as well. Please support this great society. This initial article was not focused on tarantulas alone, but also included scorpions and other arachnids I encountered during my first of these 3 years in the American Southwest. It begins early in 2017 before Brent first joined me, but then includes material after a number of visits by Brent both alone and with his Millsaps College students. The following year, my second of 2 of this 3-year field trip, I published the first article to focus on the Sky Islands, which I entitled American Mountain Endemics. By this time I had retired from the BTS and was graciously awarded an honorary membership. Society Chairman Peter Kirk had resumed control of the journal. I was now living permanently in my RV, what my British friends would call a caravan, just outside of Portal, Arizona, in Cape Creek Canyon of the Chiricahua Mountains. The Chiricahuas are the largest of the American Sky Islands and very close to the New Mexico border, with its southern end extending very close to Mexico. This article introduced journal readers unfamiliar with the Sky Islands and the Sky Island concept to what that is all about. Midway through my third and final year, I shared some more stories from the field regarding Sky Island tarantulas in American Mountain Endemics Revisited. It told the tale of Brent and myself finally finding adult female Aphonopelma catalina, as well as notes on Aphonopelma chiricahua, A. Marxi, and A. peloncillo. This final article in the series of 3 covered the Marxi-group of Aphonopelma, which is the focus of this presentation, in greater detail. As this was the after-dinner lecture, it was meant to be a little more entertaining, and I featured not only tarantulas, but also landscape photography and reptiles, birds, and mammals. This image was taken at the same location as the earlier photo of Brent and I with one of his student groups. And here is the same location at sunset, an image I captured in the company of Brent, who also enjoys landscape photography. Again, this location was less than a mile from my camp and is a wonderful place that showcases the beauty of my beloved mountain range. This incredible view was taken at the summit of a trail that led from my homestead campsite at the US Forest Service Mule and Horse Corral in Cave Creek Canyon up to an old fire lookout. The trail climbs 3,000 feet in elevation over the course of 4.5 miles and is one of my favorites in the northeastern Chiricahua Mountains. For viewers who use the metric system, that is a gain of more than 900 meters along a 7.25-kilometer hike. Standing here on the remains of the fire lookout near Silver Peak, I am looking east towards New Mexico over the little village of Portal, Arizona, which is less than 10 miles from the New Mexico state border. This photo gives you a great idea of why these mountain ranges are called islands among the sea of grasslands and deserts between. The first range east of Portal in the background there is the Peloncillo Mountains, which we will talk more about later when we talk about Aphonopelma peloncillo. Between the chiricahuas and the peloncillos is the San Simon Valley, and on the other side of the peloncillos you have another valley before you get to the Animas Mountains and then the Playas and the Big Hatchets and so on. This photo shows the high desert grassland on the west side of the Chiricahuas. Again, I am looking eastward, and you see the largest of the U.S. Sky Island ranges, the Chiricahuas, in the background. This is Chihuahuan Desert, where it begins to meet the Sonoran Desert to the west. Standing here at about 4,500 feet or 1,375 meters, quite near the entrance of Chiricahua National Monument, you can see the peaks of the Chiricahuas in the distance, rising to almost 10,000 feet or 3,000 meters. As the iconic saguaro cacti seen here reveal, this is Sonoran Desert. This is at much lower elevation, and the Sky Island range in the distance is the Galliuro Mountains, where in November 2019 I collected specimens of what may also be a new species. You will see that spider later. But you want to see photos of tarantulas, I am sure. Here is Aphonopelma marxi, a specimen I've collected in the Gila National Forest above Silver City, New Mexico. It is a gorgeous spider and the one that gives the Marxi-group its name. This group of species, also called the Sky Island Diversity Group of Aphonopelma, is the star of this lecture. But first, let's look at the genus in the United States as a whole and what Chris and Brent's 2016 revision changed. Here is the citation for their paper, which again you can find the download link for in the video description. Before the publication of this paper in 2016, there were thought to be 55 species of Aphonopelma in the United States. But before we go any further, I should make something clear. US tarantulas are not Aphonopelma. However, it will take another monumental work that examines Mexican and Central American material as well as American species to change all that. The short story is that Aphonopelma seemani of Costa Rica and other places in Central America is the type species of the genus, and its type locality is in Costa Rica. It won't shock some of you to hear that US tarantulas are not close relatives of that spider or its Central American allies. But there is much work to be done here, and the phylogenies of these New World genera need to be sorted out. For now, and probably for a long time to come, we will call them Aphonopelma. Chris and Brent's revision employed an integrative approach to species delimitation based on phylogenomics. To oversimplify, they used DNA to establish evolutionary relationships. They also used morphology and geospatial data, the latter looking at things like ecology and habitat to determine predicted ranges beyond the many samples with locality data that they included in their survey. In short, they established 33 synonymies. In other words, species that were largely erected based on minor differences that were found to not be worthy of species status. In the 3 widest ranging species of American Aphonopelma, there were 18 synonymies alone. The western Aphonopelma iodeus engulfed 5 synonymous former species, Aphonopelma chalcodes another 5, and the widest ranging species of all, Aphonopelma hensi, had 8 tarantulas formerly considered to be distinct species, considered now simply Aphonopelma hensi. Another 7 species were considered nomina dubia, which is Latin for doubtful name. They were discarded for various reasons. Thus, the 2016 revision brought 55 species of US Aphonopelma all the way down to 15. However, Chris and Brent's 2016 paper also described 14 new species, leaving us with the current 29. In this presentation, I will show you what will be number 30 later this year and a few other potential new species that may further increase that number. Here are the 14 new species. What is interesting to me is that with the exception of Aphonopelma johnny-cashi and A. moellendorffi, the other dozen are from 2 of the 6 groups that we will look at in a moment. These dozen are either Sky Island montane species, that is members of the Marxi-group that we will examine very closely, or the Paloma group, which are the dwarf species, the most diverse current group. We will come back to these groupings, and this will make more sense shortly. In the past 75 years, only these 4 significant descriptive or revisionary papers examined Aphonopelma taxonomy in the US and the spectrum of morphological character or variation. None of these were true phylogenetic works. They were largely based on morphological characters, differences in sexual organs or other body structures, for example, or even simply color and pattern. I'm a naturalist, not a scientist, and I don't want to get too technical here. But researchers have found that morphology-based phylogenies of tarantulas and other mygalomorphs as well reveal widespread patterns of homoplasy. A homoplasy is a character shared by a set of species that is not present in their common ancestor. This obviously makes determining evolutionary relationships a bit more difficult. An often used example of a homoplasy is the evolution of the eye and how it has originated independently in many different species. To really oversimplify, what you find in Aphonopelma is that not only are characters including sexual organs like mating claspers not that distinct from species to species, but also that a single species may have variation throughout its range. These morphology-based approaches to species delimitation grossly oversimplified and underestimated diversity. So what Hamilton, Hendrickson, and Bond 2016 sought to do, I had to use its formal name once, was to formally resolve the species-level diversity of American Aphonopelma by looking at species delimitation using genomic, morphological, ecological, and geospatial data. By doing so, 55 species became 15, and then 14 exciting new species were added, which brought us to the current 29 species of Aphonopelma in the United States. And as I said, the sneak peek in this lecture is that number 30 is coming soon. So let's begin by looking at the distribution of native tarantulas in the US. This figure is from Chris and Brent's revision, and as I mentioned, this paper is open source, and these figures can be acquired even if they aren't your close and very helpful friends. Whenever I use one of their figures, you will see the figure number that is in the revision. In other words, I call this figure 6 here not in relation to my lecture, but because that is what it is in their 2016 revision. You can see that these yellow spots show the 29 species occurring in the southern third of our vast country, all west of the Mississippi River. For those unfamiliar with the geography of the U.S. and just how large it is, here is a map of the 48 continental or contiguous states. This excludes Alaska and Hawaii. If you look at the top, just right of the middle, you will see the border between Minnesota and Wisconsin. And here, the Mississippi River starts at the southwestern tip of Lake Superior. Well, its traditional source is Lake Itasca, but I'm simplifying here. This is the largest of the 5 Great Lakes, and from there near Duluth, Minnesota, the river runs south to the Gulf of Mexico, along the way creating also the borders between Iowa and Missouri, with my home state of Illinois to the east, then down the western edges of Kentucky and Tennessee, and the east border of Arkansas down to Mississippi and Louisiana before emptying into the Gulf. This river runs south 2,320 miles, which is about 3,700 kilometers. All natural occurring tarantulas are found west of this river, and again, they're found in the southern third of the country that is west of the river. However, there are introduced exotics of all kinds in Florida, including things like Burmese pythons and Asian water monitors, so it should surprise no one that exotic tarantulas can be found there as well. The best known is a population of Brachypelma vagans, now known as Lilticatl vagans, near Vero Beach on the east central coast. Another is the arboreal Avicularia vicularia, which has popped up in palm trees near Naples and Marco Island in the southwest of the state. There are more. This image was just to reinforce to my UK audience how vast the US is compared to the British Islands. Several people approached me after the lectures and said they didn't quite appreciate the difference before seeing that. My response was that to drive from Portal, Arizona back to suburban Chicago where I am now, which is nowhere near the width of the country, is an 1,800 mile or 2,900 kilometer drive. If you were able to drive from Bristol 1,800 miles, you would end up just about an hour short of Ankara, the capital of Turkey. From Atlantic to Pacific coasts across the middle of the USA is about 2,700 miles, or 4,350 kilometers. Native tarantula spiders in the United States occur in 12 of the 50 states. This first group of 6 states are the westernmost and obviously contain the greatest diversity. My focus, both chasing arachnids and reptiles, especially snakes, was Arizona, where there are not only 16 species of tarantulas, far exceeding all other states, but also a staggering 13 species of rattlesnake. The 2 western states with the greatest number of species, California and Arizona, contain many species of the Paloma species group, which adds to their numbers. Looking now at the more easterly states, which lie in the middle of the U.S., you see that all but one has only 1 species. For all, that is the wide-ranging Aphonopelma hensi. Colorado has 2 species because Aphonopelma marxi can be found in its southwestern corner. This first figure from Chris and Brent's revision shows just some of the diversity of habitat where tarantulas occur in the United States. If we zoom in closer, going across the top row, you will see grassland prairie from Otero County, Colorado, then high elevation pine and conifer forest in Coconino County, northern Arizona, and then in the upper right, the habitat where I spent most of my time, mid-elevation oak woodland found throughout the Skyline mountain ranges. This particular location is Madera Canyon in the Santa Rita Mountains south of Tucson, midway to Mexico. Across the middle, we see at the left grassland oak foothills of the Sierra Nevada Mountains of Mariposa County, California. This sort of chaparral-like habitat of the California coast is somewhat similar to some areas of the Mediterranean. In the middle is gorgeous Zion National Park, Utah, and F at the far right returns us to the Chihuahuan High Desert below the Chiricahua Mountains in Cochise County, Arizona that I showed you earlier. Finally, across the bottom, we have typical Sonoran Desert with its iconic saguaro cacti reaching up for the sky, then one of the U.S.'s harshest climates, the Mojave Desert in San Bernardino County, California, and finally at the bottom right, the Tamaulipan thorn scrub of Starr County, Texas. Here we finally arrive at defining the 6 groups of US Aphonopelma. Since 2 are eastern diversity groups, you can also look at it as 5 groups, but I will explain the significant difference between what I call Eastern Diversity Group A and Eastern Diversity Group B. At the top, you see the Steindachnery species group only consists of 1 species. It occupies the basal position among US Aphonopelma. It is the sister taxon to all of the others. Although it is a lone species, it is very wide-ranging in Southern California, and the 2016 revision noted that it is probable that when studies look at species outside of the U.S., in Baja California, Mexico, and also northwestern Mexico, on the other side of the Gulf, they may find other species that fit in this group. The second group, with 4 species, is the Iodia species group, also known as Western diversity. It includes Aphonopelma chalcodes, A. utulinum, and A. johnnycashi, along with A. iodeus. I should mention that these groups get their names from the species that was described first. In other words, the oldest species known to science. It isn't that Iodeus is necessarily special, just that it was the first of the 4 species in its group described. Next, we have the 2 eastern diversity groups, which each contain 3 species for a total of 6. The big difference between the 3 members of the Maderatum group and the 3 in hensi is that the former group contains species where there is striking sexual dichromatism. That is, mature males are primarily black and look very dissimilar to mature females of the same species. Ultimate males in the hensi group look similar to its mature females, albeit now with male sexual organs and a slender leggy build. The eastern species are largely distributed east of the Cochise filter barrier, which is basically where the Sonoran Desert of the West meets the Chihuahuan Desert of eastern Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. The Marxi group, or Sky Islands Diversity Group, are the emphasis of this presentation, and we will spend the most time on them. The 6 species are Aphonopelma marxi, along with A. catalina, A. chiricahua, A. madera, A. peloncillo, and A. vorhiesi. These are dark spiders with reddish abdominal hairs. Freshly molted females are dark brown to blackish with fiery hairs, and mature males are very black with striking orange, red, or red hairs on the abdomen. Finally, we have the dozen species of the Paloma species group. Again, these tarantulas have exploited habitat and become very diverse via miniaturization as well as their activity periods. These are A. atomicum, A. isonogale, A. joshua, A. meriki, A. mojave, A. parvis, A. phasmis, A. prentice, A. saguaro, A. superstitionense, and A. huahua. And of course, Aphonopelma, which may be the smallest of all. Moving quickly through these groups, utilizing figures from the revision, here you see Aphonopelma steindachnerii, the sole member of its group. As I said, it's a distinctly monophyletic lineage supported as the sister lineage to all other species of Aphonopelma in the U.S. It is very common and widely distributed across Southern California. The Western diversity, or Iodeus group, contains 4 species, and 3 of them share a basic look of pale carapace and somewhat pale legs, with the exception of A. johnnycashi. This new species, described in the 2016 revision, is an anomaly that may deserve further scrutiny. It's a bit of an oddball for sure, even if it does have a very cool species name. Aphonopelma chalcodes is perhaps the iconic American tarantula, and it is widely distributed across the southern 2/3 of Arizona south of the Grand Canyon, its westernmost boundary being the Colorado River. There has been at least one specimen recorded from New Mexico. This was in Rodeo, which is 10 miles from Portal, Arizona, where I lived. But I would consider this wide-ranging, both in distribution and habitat species, to be limited to Arizona and the United States for the most part. However, it is undoubtedly also widespread throughout northern Mexico and the state of Sonora. Aphonopelma utulinum is widely distributed across Southern California and is very common. In many areas it can be syntopic, which means has the ability to coexist without interference with other species, with its groupmate Aphonopelma iodeus, as well as A. steindachnerii and the Paloma group species A. huahua. Iodeus itself is one of the most widespread and abundant species in the U.S. Its wide distribution stretches across varied habitat from the Bay of California, south across the Coast Ranges and the transverse ranges into the Mojave Desert, and also north throughout the Great Basin Desert of Nevada, northwestern Arizona, and Utah. Aphonopelma johnnycashi occurs in the western foothills of California's Sierra Nevada mountains. Its name honors country music legend Johnny Cash, not only because one location it can be found is near Folsom Prison, which is featured in the Cash catalog, but also because, like the Man in Black, males are very black in color. This figure from the revision shows the range of Aphonopelma chalcodes, the widest ranging species here in Arizona. At the top you see a topo map with the yellow dots representing locality data for specimens sampled by Chris and Brent's paper, and the bottom map shows its predicted distribution with the warmer colors representing higher probability than the cooler colors that extend into California and New Mexico where it isn't truly known. This is a specimen of Aphonopelma chalcodes I photographed in the Chiricahua foothills, both at about the southeastern limit of its range and nearly the highest elevation where it occurs. As a widespread species, you will find it quite variable in appearance if you compare specimens from quite different habitats and locations. I photographed this Aphonopelma chalcodes during the 2014 conference of the American Tarantula Society. This was taken in Catalina State Park outside of Tucson. This spider is more typical of the lowland Sonoran desert populations. It is very blonde. Photographed during the same conference, this female is sitting at her burrow mouth on the hotel grounds where the ATS conference was held. And as males were also wandering about as I explored the hotel grounds with Chad Campbell and Jason Newland enjoying a beer, we played matchmaker and got images like this of mating. Here you see the Superstition Mountains east of Phoenix. This area holds an interesting population of Aphonopelma chalcodes, where you can find females in rocky roadside embankments, sort of living in rock and dirt caves. I took this image on July 31st, 2019, when Mark Pennell, among my best friends and co-host of the BTS lectures as well as the long-term BTS webmaster, came to visit me to celebrate my 55th birthday. Brent Hendrickson had visited me the week before and then moved alone elsewhere in Arizona to continue his field work on both scorpions and tarantulas. But that night, Brent met back up with me and Mark at an area hotel, and we later spent the evening in an area of the superstitions called Tortilla Flat. Here you see the ghost town of Tortilla Flat along what is called the Apache Trail. This was the last stagecoach stop along the trail before the Theodore Roosevelt Dam was constructed on the Salt River in 1904. It was later deserted after a 1942 flood and then rebuilt in the late 80s after some fire damage. In 1998, an Indiana farmer purchased it, and this is how it looks now. We park here, and then we walk up the road to look for spiders and more. And on this occasion, the reason Brent wanted us to visit was to look for the amblypygid or tailless whip scorpion, Paraphrinus carolini, long known as Paraphrinus mexicanus, to collect many specimens for photographic purposes. I took this image in the previous year of a female wandering on the very rocky and steep roadside embankment just above the ghost town, and then this image that shows the caves they occupy in this interesting terrain. Here you see Mark photographing a saguaro cactus in the Superstition Mountains background on his first evening ever in Arizona. And this video shows Mark with one of the many mature Aphonopelma chalcodes we found along the road. As we had arrived quite some time before sunset, we drove up the road as far as we could as we waited for dark for the amblypygids. It was very humid for the usually dry Phoenix Mesa area, and we knew this would be a great evening for Paraphrinus. They are much more abundant when there's some humidity in the air. We just had to wait until dark. The funny thing was that as we drove up the road, Brent commented on how despite many times driving this road in summer, he had never seen a mature male crossing the road. Of course, it wasn't but minutes before we first saw our first one, and we stopped counting once we got to about 12. But these being the first Aphonopelma chalcodes Mark had ever seen in the wild, we enjoyed every single one. Here you see our actual target, Paraphrinus carolini. It was pitch black, but with diffuse flash, this looks like a daytime image. A little story first. We had parked at Tortilla Flat Ghost Town as the sun was setting, and then began to walk up the embankments to look for tarantulas until full darkness brought out the amblypygids. It wasn't long before Mark encountered his first ever rattlesnake in the wild, a half-grown western diamondback. A car had slowed to talk to us and ask us what we were doing, and they spotted the snake first. I just had my macro camera rig with me. I wasn't prepared for snake wrangling. So I dashed back to my truck to get everything to not only move the snake for photos, but also some additional photo gear. I presumed that Mark would keep his eye on the snake. However, he got talking with the couple in the car, and when they moved on, he had lost the snake and began following Brent up the road. I couldn't believe when I returned that he wouldn't get a photo of his first ever wild buzztail. However, not too long later, Brent noticed an even cooler rattlesnake. This is the tiger rattlesnake that would be the second of 7 species of rattlesnake Mark got to see during his visit. Tigers have a very broken distribution and are fairly uncommon, and this was a special snake indeed. They have proportionally small heads thought to help them poke into rock piles for lizards and rodents, and they also have proportionally large rattles. I now had my snake gear and wrangled this beauty into position for our photographs. Then we found all the Paraphrinus we needed, saw many Aphonopelma chalcodes and other arachnids, and then decided to head back west towards Mesa, where we would take Mark to a locality to see the desert hairy scorpion. But first we had to stop at Canyon Lake near Tortilla Flat to watch the sunset further. Before we leave Aphonopelma chalcodes in the Iodeus group, this is a photo from the end of Mark's stay with me in Arizona. It was photographed in the Catalina Mountains at one of the highest elevations that Aphonopelma chalcodes can be found. In fact, it was just below the site where Brent and I found Aphonopelma catalina last year, a story I told in one of my journal articles, and that will also be shown later in this presentation. Finding Aphonopelma chalcodes at 5,000 feet or more, about 1,500 meters plus, where it is syntopic with the montane Aphonopelma catalina, is special. And this was a special spider that capped off Mark's trip to Arizona perfectly. Now moving on to the Maderatum group, you will first notice that the elusive A. mullendorfi is not here to see. Chris and Brent didn't have an image for the revision, and I've never seen one. It is very rare. The other two spiders I am, however, extremely familiar with. Aphonopelma gabelii is distributed mostly throughout the Chihuahuan Desert of southeastern Arizona, southern New Mexico, and west Texas, but is also known from adjacent areas of the high plains and near the canyon mouths in the Madrean skylands that we will come to soon. Where I lived in Portal, Arizona, Aphonopelma gabelii was common in the foothills where it is syntopic with A. vorhiesi. However, Aphonopelma gabelii matures in late spring or early summer, and wandering males are the first tarantulas people in the area see. Aphonopelma moderatum is one of the first species I ever saw in the wild going back to those early 80s road trips. Trips to travel along the Rio Grande in West Texas, which is the border with Mexico, were primarily to look for this gorgeous spider. Its distribution is primarily in the counties that border the Rio Grande, but it is also found in a few areas more to the interior. A. moellendorffi is only known from a handful of southwestern Texas localities where it is said to be found in syntopy with a handful of other species, including its group mate Aphonopelma moderatum and two Hensi group species, A. armata and A. hensi. However, not many people have found this spider. To highlight this group, I will focus on Aphonopelma gabelii, which I encountered often in the Chiricahua Mountains and elsewhere. This first image shows female that Brent and I showed Mark the following morning on his second day in Arizona. We drove the 5 hours from the Mesa, Arizona area back to my home in the Chiricahuas, passing an area between the Pinileños, another skyline range, and the Chiricahuas that is typical Chihuahuan high desert and is a spot Brent and I visit for Aphonopelma gabelii as well as A. vorhiesi and the dwarf A. parvum. We were happy to be able to find Mark these Aphonopelma gabelii. Here you see a very typical silk-covered burrow, and then Brent encouraging one out of its burrow after we had flushed it to the mouth.
Yeah. There we go. That's a nice female there. That's better.
This image of Aphonopelma gabelii shows how very domed the triangle at the front of the carapace can be on larger females. And here you see a tarantula hawk wasp that has paralyzed Aphonopelma gabelii. 3 times during the past year I was lucky enough to witness this behavior, and each time the poor tarantula involved was Aphonopelma gabelii. Interestingly, all 3 times I observed it was at night when I was out road cruising for snakes. Finally, here is male Aphonopelma gabelii. It can look very similar to A. vorhiesi, and where they are syntopic, like in the Chiricahua foothills where I live, the best way to tell them apart is by date and condition. Since Aphonopelma gabelii matures long before A. vorhiesi, if it is May or June, it is certainly Aphonopelma gabelii, and if it is July or August, you have to determine the condition. By then, Aphonopelma gabelii males look very rough, and A. vorhiesi males have only recently molted and matured and should be in very good condition. As a rule, the abdominal hairs on A. vorhiesi, in this area at least, are much more reddish. So they aren't that similar after all. Briefly looking at Aphonopelma moderatum, since I know many of you find this to be among the most attractive American species, if not the most beautiful, this young female was photographed a couple years ago near Del Rio, Texas, near the start of my 3-year field trip. And finally, an image by Brian Hendrickson that shows the striking sexual dichromatism of the moderatum group, which makes it much different than the other eastern diversity group, the Hensi group, that we will come to next. The Hensi group contains the largest tarantulas in the U.S. Aphonopelma anax is one of the largest and certainly the most robust American theraphosids, and it is widely distributed across southern Texas. It should be noted that the large specimens are from the south of the range and represent the largest tarantulas in the U.S., whereas the northern populations of the species tend to be generally smaller. Aphonopelma armata has a wide distribution across Texas, yet surprisingly it is a somewhat unknown species. It is found in varied habitat including the Chihuahuan Desert, the Great Plains, and Texas's Edwards Plateau, southern and east central plains, and the southwestern tablelands and blackland prairies. Throughout its diverse range, it can be found in syntope with not only its group mates Aphonopelma annex and A. hensi, but also A. gabeli, A. moderatum, and A. moellendorffi. Aphonopelma hensi is the most abundant and widely distributed species in the United States by far. As I showed earlier, it is the only species in the states towards the east where tarantulas naturally occur in the United States just west of the Mississippi River. Its range is so vast that there is great variation in its habitat preferences, and in different environments it constructs different burrow types. Here is a gorgeous image by Brent. Note his initials in the upper left on his photos. That shows just how beautiful Aphonopelma hensi can be. It isn't blue and yellow or purple and orange, but it is a handsome beast indeed. This is a photo I captured of A. hensi in the west of its range near Animas, New Mexico, showing some variation in carapace color. And finally, a video of a mature male, also from the boot heel of southwestern New Mexico near Animas. This little video clip is of a spider I found in late fall in remarkably good condition. These spiders can mature at different times in different areas, and I find them well into November near Animas. Moving on to the last of the groups before we reach our focus, the Marxi-group or Sky Island Aphonopelma, here are the 14 species of Paloma group. As mentioned, it has become extremely diverse and exploited its habitat through miniaturization, and also most species are active in the fall after its syntopic species have plugged up their holes. The adult female Aphonopelma paloma is roughly 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters in total length. I say 14, but you will see that Chris and Brent's revision did not include an image of A. phasmis, and there are only 13 images seen here. But you'll also notice that Aphonopelma huahua was represented only by the mature male. We don't have time to examine this remarkable group in detail, but one of the interesting facts about it is that a number of the species build turrets above their burrow entrances, and others leave excavated earth around their tiny holes in other predictable ways. Here you see what may be a new species from California that Brent discovered, and its turret, and here you see the turret of fluffy soil and silk of Aphonopelma prentice. Aphonopelma paloma itself does not build a turret, but its burrow entrance is always surrounded by excavated soil in this very distinct crescent shape. I took these photos of an adult female at the top and her burrow at the bottom at the type locality in Pinal County, Arizona. Next we have the female and male of Aphonopelma parvum, the paloma group species I am most familiar with. I took these images on the Arizona-New Mexico state line between Portal, Arizona, where I lived, and Rodeo, New Mexico, only 10 miles away. This is a wide-ranging species, but this is its type locality. And here you see Brent at that same site, collecting a female we extracted from a burrow only 10 minutes from my camp. This is actually a large female, which shows just how small these tarantulas are. And here you see the large mound of dirt excavated from its pea-sized burrow. This helps you determine that it's a tarantula burrow and not a wolf spider burrow, which this area is littered with. For size reference, here's an American dime to show how small these holes are. For those of you in the UK, the US dime or 10-cent coin is a tad smaller than your new penny. And to just show one more pair of Paloma group species, here are the female and male Aphonopelma saguaro I photographed with Brent when we collected them from near the Superstition Mountains east of Phoenix. So finally we arrive at the focus of this presentation, after only 48 minutes of me rambling. The species of the Sky Islands of the US, known as the Marxi-group. Here we see the 6 present species: Aphonopelma catalina, Aphonopelma madera, Aphonopelma peloncillo, Aphonopelma chiricahua, Aphonopelma marxi, and Aphonopelma vorhiesi. These higher elevation species are primarily very dark brown or black when freshly molted, with orangish red hairs on the abdomen. Mature males are jet black with fiery orange-red abdominal hairs. Although they are found in varied habitat and elevations, generally speaking, these are spiders of the oak woodlands and pine oak woodlands of the Sky Island mountain ranges, between 5,000 feet or 1,500 meters and going up above 7,000 feet. Aphonopelma vorhiesi occurs at the lowest elevations and extended into the high desert of the mountain foothills and the desert grasslands between. I am excited to be able to show you what will become this year the 7th American species of this group. It is a new species Brent Hendrickson and I discovered in the Chiricahua Mountains with 4 specimens collected on Halloween Day, or October 31, 2018. This past October, I found an additional specimen before the team of 6 I showed you at the beginning of this presentation assembled, and we collected quite a few more, not only at the type locality near 7,700 feet, or 2,350 meters, but also at higher elevation at about 8,300 feet, or over 2,500 meters, and then later at lower elevations of about 5,200 to 5,500 feet, 1,600 meters or so, where it is syntopic with Aphonopelma chiricahua. Although this presentation is limited to U.S. species, I do want to make quick mention of another member of the group that Brent recently described from Mexico. Aphonopelma bacadawachi is certainly only the first of what will be eventually described from the Madrean skylands south of the U.S. border. So let's talk more about the Madrean skylands and the skyland concept before we examine the 6 currently described species of the Marxi or skyland diversity group of US Aphonopelma, and then show you our new species and some other spiders collected in the autumn of 2019 that may also prove to be yet to be described species. Madrean refers to the Sierra Madre Occidental mountain range of northwestern Mexico, which is the primary influence on the skylands of the U.S. This map, taken from wildsonora.com, shows the 60 or so skyland ranges on both sides of the border. Those of you interested in learning more about skylands are encouraged to visit skyislandalliance.org, where this map is taken from. It shows a better representation of these mountain ranges and how the mountain ranges form islands among the sea of grasslands and deserts between. Only larger mammals and birds could survive the sea to move from island to island, and this has facilitated speciation in each mountain range, and has the 8 biomes that you will find in these skylands as you move higher in elevation. We will come back to that shortly. Looking closer at the U.S. skyland ranges, you will see that they primarily lie in Arizona, with the peloncillo mountains just inside the New Mexico border in what we call the boot heel of extreme southwestern New Mexico. To the east, you see the Animas, Big Hatchet, Alamo Hueco, and beyond. In extreme southeastern Arizona, you will see the largest of the skyland ranges, the Chiricahua Mountains that I called home for almost 3 years. The Madrean skylands rise out of lowland valleys in both Arizona and New Mexico in the USA, and also the states of Sonora and Chihuahua in Mexico. This set of islands, or archipelago, is known for the diversity of its life, both flora and fauna, and the diversity of its life zones. The skylands lie north and west of the Sierra Madre Occidental and south of the Rocky Mountains and Colorado Plateau of the U.S. in the north. They bridge the divide between the Chihuahuan and Sonoran deserts and also tropical and temperate climate zones. This illustrates the 8 biomes of the skylands. About every 1,000 feet or 300 meters of elevation gain results in a change in habitat. Here you can see how these mountain ranges can rise out of 2,000 feet or 600 meters in the Sonoran Desert outside of Tucson to almost 10,000 feet or 3,000 meters where the mixed conifer forests make you feel like you're in the Rocky Mountains of Montana. As you can also see here, the habitat can be different on the north-facing slopes than on the south-facing slopes that receive more sun and are thus drier. This figure details these different biomes in 2 specific U.S. skyland ranges. It is possible to leave the desert where daytime temperature may reach 120 degrees Fahrenheit or 49 degrees centigrade or Celsius, and by the time you reach the mountaintop it can be 75 degrees Fahrenheit or 24 degrees centigrade. This dramatic change over the course of 10, 20, or 30 miles results in equally dramatic changes in the plants you will encounter. It is estimated that going up 1,000 feet or 300 meters in elevation is roughly equivalent to traveling 165 miles, that's 265 kilometers, to the north. Climbing only a few miles, you can see changes in the flora equivalent to traveling hundreds of miles northward. Quickly illustrating these biomes with photos, we first see the desert scrub at about 2,000 to 3,500 feet above sea level, or 600 to 1,000 meters. Climbing higher, we find the semi-desert grassland at about 3,500 to 4,500 feet, or 600 to 1,375 meters. This is the high desert grassland about 4,500 feet or 1,400 meters I showed you earlier, just west of the Chiricahua Mountains. Next, we have the oak grassland near 5,000 feet or 1,500 meters. Here you can see that the north-facing slope can be evergreen oak woodland, while the hotter and drier south-facing slope is grassland. Moving up even higher, which is easily done in the Catalina Mountains northeast of the metropolis of Tucson, where there's a 30-mile paved highway that takes you out of the desert to the ski slopes at the summit of the mountain. We find next oak woodland. Here at 5,000 to 6,200 feet, about 1,525 to 1,900 meters, many of our skyline tarantulas can be found. Here's another photo representing the oak woodland biome. At the right is an Apache pine, and alligator junipers are also common here, as is Palmer's agave and mountain yucca and other plants among the grassy floor. But to the left, you see one of the many emery and Arizona and silverleaf oaks that can be found that give this oak woodland its name. Higher still, we begin to encounter pine trees. We come to pine oak woodland where the oaks give way to conifers. Madrean pine oak woodland can be found from 5,000 to 7,000 feet, 1,650 to 2,150 meters, between oak woodland below and the pure pine forest above. Both pines and oaks dominate the overstory here, while the understory is often very sparse. At 7,000 to 8,200 feet or so, 2,150 to over 2,500 meters, the pine forest is represented by vast stands of ponderosa pine, much like the northern part of the Sierra Madre Occidental in Mexico. This is the type locality of our new species, which is the smallest of the American sky island tarantulas. Among Arizona and ponderosa pines, where the ground is soft and moist and covered with lush grass and pine needles, it is drier where the sun shines much of the day. Mixed conifer forest grows only at the highest elevations and the north-facing parts in the Madrean Sky Islands. This is just below the tree line, which occurs at about 10,000 feet or 3,000 meters. Mixed conifer forest features tall trees such as Douglas and white firs, Engelmann spruce, and white pines. It is very difficult to remember that you are in Arizona when you stand in these cool primordial forests. So now that we have an understanding of the Sky Islands and the habitat where these species occur, let us examine each of these 6 present American Marxi-group species and the soon-to-be-described new species. First, Aphonopelma marxi, the oldest described species and thus the tarantula that gives the group its name. It is a gorgeous spider that challenges those who think that US tarantulas are nothing but brown jobs. In this figure from Chris and Brent's revision, you see its wide distribution across higher elevation areas of northern Arizona, northwestern New Mexico, southwestern Colorado, and southeastern Utah. We call this region the Four Corners, as the borders of these states join in perfect right angles. Aphonopelma marxi has been found in a variety of habitats from sagebrush steppe all the way up to mixed conifer forests. At its lowest elevation in southwestern populations, it can be found syntopic with Aphonopelma chalcodes and the dwarf Aphonopelma mareki. Like all skyline species, male maturity and the breeding season generally occurs in the fall, as well as September and through November. However, I'm going to show you some exceptions, such as Aphonopelma peloncillo and Aphonopelma vorhiesi, which are found at lower elevation and thus can breed in the summer when the monsoon rains come. This map shows you the 2 greatest concentrations of Aphonopelma marxi in pale orange, one in Arizona and the other in northern New Mexico. And at the bottom you see a red circle that represents one of its most southeastern populations in the area where I have collected and filmed this species at an elevation of over 7,000 feet, 2,100 meters or more. This is the Gila National Forest north of Silver City, New Mexico. Followers of my YouTube channel will recognize this photograph from the 21-minute documentary I made on finding this spider. It will be linked in the video description below. This roadside embankment along a well-traveled paved road is a favorite spot for finding this beautiful spider. Brent takes his field biology students there each year, and it was with his classes that I first visited the locality. Here's a brief excerpt from that YouTube video showing me flushing and tickling a gorgeous montane tarantula, Aphonopelma marxi, from its home. This is actually an adult female, plenty mature, but they do grow larger in other areas of their range. Again, to watch the entire video and some other tarantula documentaries and short snake clips, please visit my Exotic Fauna YouTube channel, linked in the video description. Aphonopelma marxi is a stunning spider that can vary in color from this dark brown with orangish hairs all over its body and legs to almost jet black with bright orange-red abdominal hairs. It is a gorgeous tarantula indeed. Here is Brent's image of the male and female. These spiders were also from Gila County, New Mexico. Next, we look at the lowest elevation and most widespread member of the group, Aphonopelma vorhiesi. Although it is a spider found in desert scrub and desert grassland or high desert, I found this past fall above 5,200 feet, 1 mile above sea level or 1,600 meters in elevation in the Chiricahua Mountains, where it becomes syntopic with Aphonopelma chiricahua. Aphonopelma vorhiesi is widely distributed across southeast Arizona and southern New Mexico and can be found in a variety of habitats and in syntopy with large number of species. Aphonopelma catalina, chiricahua, madera, peloncillo from its own group, as well as Aphonopelma gabeli and Aphonopelma hensi, and the paloma group species Aphonopelma paloma, parvum, and saguaro. Here you see its known and predicted distribution. This Aphonopelma vorhiesi brings me back to August 2019 when Mark Pennell visited me along with John Apple and his partner Ashley to celebrate my 55th birthday. I went into my RV to get a round of beers, and when I came out, this female was just wandering outside my door. Now that's tarantula hunting that's easier than flushing, ticking, and digging. This photo by Brent shows that in some areas you can actually find excavated soil outside the burrow of Aphonopelma vorhiesi. This young female, very pale in appearance, I sadly found while road cruising for snakes at dusk. It was sitting still on the roadside shoulder, and it had obviously been paralyzed by a tarantula hawk wasp that for some reason didn't get to drag it away. It was alive, but immobile. This spider was the higher elevation chiricahua specimen I first found. Because of where it was found and its appearance, I actually wasn't certain whether it was Aphonopelma vorhiesi or A. chiricahua. It wasn't until Brent later did the DNA work on her that we knew that she was Aphonopelma vorhiesi. This spider has a funny story as well. My friend Wyatt Mendez, who you saw in the image of the 6 of us tarantula hunters that comprised Team Skylands 2019, a photo which you will see again shortly, had dropped by my camp. I was looking for some grasshoppers to feed a few spiders I had on hand temporarily holding for Brent, and I found this girl beneath a log. No burrow, just hidden in a scrape beneath the wood as if she had stopped there when something caused her to abandon her nearby hole. Finally, here is the mature male. As I said, the Marxi-group males look much the same, very black with a very fiery abdomen. Next, we look at the endemic species from the Catalina Mountains that Chris and Brent described in 2016. As I mentioned earlier, the Catalina Mountains are just outside the city limits of Tucson, and it is well developed with a paved road that climbs the range for 30 miles and gives the residents of the hot desert city a way to escape the stifling heat of summer with a gorgeous 1-hour scenic drive up to the summit. There even is skiing during the winter, and snow can actually fall even in the summer at the highest elevations. In fact, Brent and I collected scorpions there once at about 9,000 feet, which is about 2,700 meters, a couple years ago, flipping rocks that were covered by a couple of inches of snow. Meanwhile, it was over 86 degrees or 30 degrees centigrade down in Tucson that afternoon. This spider is hard work to find and was only known from 6 individuals found within a few kilometers of each other when it was described. Since then, our team and our friends have found a number more, and mature males are often posted to citizen science sites like iNaturalist during the fall breeding season. Both nuclear and mitochondrial DNA have shown that Aphonopelma catalina is a phylogenetically distinct monophyletic lineage supported as a sister species to Aphonopelma chiricahua. Both species are endemic to the ranges where they are found. Here you see what a gorgeous spider she is, made even more special by the hard work and persistence that went into Brent and I finally finding this adult female ourselves. Along this trail, Brent and I were joined in 2018 by a couple from Wickenburg, Arizona that was interested in finding spiders with us. Our foursome only found mature males wandering about in the open that day. We saw plenty of holes in the ground, but they all seemed to be rodent burrows or something other than the lair of a theraphosid spider. This terrain is difficult to work, and we flipped all kinds of cover, swept the grasses in search of obscured burrows, and poured as much water as we could carry down any reasonable-looking hole we found. We soon gave up and drove east to quite a different area of the foothills to show the couple the dwarf species Aphonopelma saguaro. Fortunately, we had success with that species. But several days later, Brent and I returned to this trail alone. We found more males. We also found Aphonopelma chalcodes and even a fossorial snake as we flipped cover and returned to the hard work of finding the spider. But eventually I came to a male that was climbing on a trailside boulder. Here you see me filming Brent taking an iPhone snapshot of the defensive boy. Brent looked down at his feet. There was a rough-looking burrow we would have dismissed as being a potential tarantula home if he hadn't noticed a slight little bit of silk near its mouth. Our first thought was that perhaps this male had occupied the unpromising hole. It may have even been made by a rodent and was only being temporarily used as shelter by the male. However, Brent can dig out tarantulas like nobody I ever met, and we hadn't found any holes that looked promising elsewhere, so he decided it was worth some effort to investigate further. He scraped with his pickaxe in impossibly hard and rocky terrain. Finding rocks that we might not even have the strength to lift can become discouraging, but he was determined. We began to pull large rocks out as he dug at the hole, which was right where the embankment met the flat trail. Occasionally we would pour water in. In the Southwest, flushing burrows and simulating flash flooding is an amazing method of at least determining if there is life in the hole. Eventually Brent saw a tarantula leg, and then it was game on. I knew nothing would stop him from extracting the spider. We thought it might be small as the tunnel seemed narrow and the forelegs thin, but imagine our surprise when after about 30 minutes of tough work, I would have the beauty in hand.
Light is really bad.
At this point, Brent is seeing the female, so it was only a matter of time before he would dig her out. And here you see her. Yeah.
I just happened to look down and I saw that hole. I was like,
And here you see the male that led us to the only female we have found to date. Wyatt and some of his friends of his have found more, but this is a difficult spider indeed. Next, we come to Aphonopelma madera, which, unlike Aphonopelma catalina and chiricahua, is not endemic to only one mountain range. And that is why it is my least favorite of all Aphonopelma-specific epithets, or species names. Madera refers to Madera Canyon, just one canyon in the Santa Rita Mountains and its type locality. The Santa Ritas are less than an hour south and southeast of Tucson, halfway between that city and the Mexico border. But not only is it not limited to that canyon, but it also isn't confined to the Santa Ritas. It can also be found in the Pajarito Mountains along the Mexico border to the southwest and the Huachuca Mountains to the southeast. It's been collected from riparian areas, along rivers, oak grassland, oak woodland, and pine oak woodland. In fact, it is the only member of the Marxi-group currently known to not be restricted to a single mountain range. Here is Brent's photo of a female and a male. and this pair of Pajarito specimens that were photographed by Brent. Next we come to Aphonopelma peloncillo, which has been a personal favorite of mine both due to its appearance and the rugged and isolated range where it lives. What a beautiful tarantula with a very bright abdomen, rusty orange hairs on the legs, and often a greenish sheen to its carapace. So far known only from the narrow and long strip that is the Peloncillo Mountains, which lie mostly in southwestern New Mexico but enter Arizona at both the top and bottom of its length, Aphonopelma peloncillo is known from lower to mid-elevation habitats. It may be that its distribution is wider than currently known, and Brent and I found some specimens in Arizona in the San Simon Valley between the chiricahuas and the peloncillos that we thought may very well be Aphonopelma peloncillo. This requires further investigation. At its lower elevations, it can be found in syntopy with Aphonopelma chalcodes, A. gabeli, A. hensi, A. parvum, and A. vorhiesi. And unlike other Sky Island tarantulas, except for the lowland A. vorhiesi, its breeding season is in summer, during the monsoon season that occurs in July and August. This is the type locality in oak grassland near the entrance of the National Forest in the southeast of the Peloncillo mountain range. The type locality is only 4 miles or about 6.5 kilometers from the type locality of this endemic scorpion, Diplocentris peloncillensis, which is my favorite US scorpion. In the summer of 2019, Wyatt Mendez and I joined Brent and a group of his students at both type localities, that of the tarantula and of the scorpion, and Wyatt found the first Aphonopelma peloncillo we had ever found at the scorpion site. Here you see this beautiful spider at the left, where the above right shows its silk-covered burrow in the grassland, which is often grazed by cattle, and then at the burrow mouth once the silk was wiped away and she was flushed and tickled. Although my heart now belongs to my new species that Brent and I discovered, as well as the other endemic chiricahua mountain tarantula, Aphonopelma chiricahua, this is still my favorite of the American tarantulas, and I hope these images show why. Here's a photograph by Brent of a female and of a mature male. Finally, we come to my home range and the spider named for it. And then we will come to the new species also from this most special and largest of the Sky Islands, the Chiricahua Mountains, a place where the Apaches like Geronimo and Cochise once called home. We begin with Brent's studio image of the adult pair. On this map, you will see just a couple of yellow dots centered around Cave Creek Canyon in the northeast of the Chiricahuas and the Chiricahua National Monument across the peaks on the northwest side. Aphonopelma chiricahuas are restricted to the Chiricahuas in Cochise County, Arizona. Chris and Brent wrote that very little is known about the natural history of this elusive species. In fact, their 2016 description of this Sky Island endemic was based solely on 7 females found wandering over the years and a female that had been preserved for about 50 years. No females have been collected in the modern era that we knew of. Most of the males have been found near the American Museum of Natural History Southwestern Research Station, which is located in Cave Creek Canyon about 5 miles from Portal, Arizona, and only a few miles up canyon from where I was camped in this gorgeous mountain range. Here you see this huge range on the map again. It runs almost 40 miles or 65 kilometers north to south and is more than 15 miles or 25 kilometers wide in its greatest width in the area from Portal in the east to the National Monument on the west. As you will note, it is in extreme southeastern Arizona, just north of the Mexico border and along the border of the U.S. state of New Mexico, running parallel to the narrow peloncillos to its east, and between you have the San Simon Valley. Many things makes the Chiricahua special, but its location between the Sonora and Chihuahuan Desert with the Rocky Mountains to the north and Mexico's Sierra Madre Occidental to the southeast results in incredible plant and animal diversity, with many endemic species and Mexican flora and fauna found nowhere else in the U.S. Additionally, it has a Great Plains influence coming from the northeast due to the Deming or Cordilleran Gap. This is where the continental divide is only at 4,500 feet or 1,370 meters in elevation, which allows Great Plains species to move southwest. This image from the Sky Island Alliance shows a 6th biotic influence on the Sky Islands, the neotropics of far northwestern Mexico west of the Sierra Madre Occidental, and the humid air and monsoon rains that come off the Gulf of California. I fell in love with the Chiricahuas and its breathtaking views and amazing wildlife, and was fortunate to live in this RV at the Forest Service's corral for much of 2018 and 2019. I volunteered at the Cave Creek Canyon Visitor Center as a host and naturalist, and spent my free time chasing spiders and wrangling snakes, as well as photographing plenty of other wildlife. So forgive me for some bird and mammal images, and finally some of my beloved rattlesnakes. First, we see the bird that brings more visitors to Cave Creek Canyon than any other living thing, the elegant trogon. Trogons are largely tropical and are relatives of the resplendent quetzal, and seeing this species in the USA is special. It lives in Mexico and comes to the Chiricahuas and a few other southern skyline ranges like the Santa Ritas and Huachucas in April to breed and nest. Then in fall, most return to Mexico for the winter. Bird watchers, or twitchers as I've discovered Brits call them, come from around the world just to see this dazzling bird. However, my favorite bird in the Chiricahuas is the blue-throated mountain gem, the largest hummingbird species that occurs in the U.S. It is over 5 inches in length and has an 8-inch wingspan. It is also a Mexican species that is found in the U.S. only a few places just above the border. In the Chiricahua Mountains, our population stays year-round. It is large enough to survive winters where the temperatures can drop below freezing and snow falls. Another Mexican species seen in the Chiricahuas is the Mexican fox squirrel. The only place this Mexican squirrel can be seen in the U.S. is actually the Chiricahuas, and interestingly, it is the only tree squirrel in that range. The common squirrel of the Chiricahuas is the rock squirrel, which lives on the rocks and, you guessed it, rocks, on the ground. This is not my image. However, the jaguar does occasionally enter the Chiricahuas, but it is a phantom. It is so elusive that it is only ever seen by wildlife trap cameras and cameras used by Border Patrol to catch illegal migrants and drug traffickers, something that is common in this border range. These are males that have wandered far from the closest females, which are found about 150 miles or 240 kilometers to the south in Mexico. The big cat that we do see is the mountain lion or puma, and I was lucky enough to have 7 sightings of that secretive cat over the past 2 years. Much smaller bobcats are extremely common in the Chiricahuas, and I saw them often, even in the heat of day, and some were very cooperative photographic subjects. Another mammal I saw often was the New Mexican race of the black bear, which shows both the Rocky Mountain and eastern influence on this range. But this tropical animal that I have seen in Mexico and Costa Rica was one of my favorite sightings when I was hiking the backcountry. The white-nosed quadi, often called the quadimundi, is a member of the raccoon family and about the size of a medium dog. Males are often seen alone, but females and juveniles can be observed in troops of 30 or more in the Chiricahuas. It is another example of how the tropics and the Sierra Madre Occidental and Mexico influence this American range. As a photographer, my favorite subjects are snakes, and my favorite snakes are rattlesnakes. I was fortunate that Arizona has 13 species, and 6 or 7 can be found from the desert grassland sea around the Chiricahuas to the mountainous island itself. Here we see the western diamondback, the most abundant rattlesnake throughout its range, and those of the boot heel of southwestern New Mexico and southeast Arizona, the area that I prowled, are among the most beautiful, with some very pink or coral in color to match the reddish earth of the region. They average only about 1 meter in length, much smaller than the monster diamondbacks of Texas that can be twice that. In the desert scrub of the foothills and even on the east side of the town of Portal, the Mojave rattlesnake is syntopic with this diamondback. This is the most dangerous snake in the U.S. in venom toxicity, but it actually envenomates fewer people than the diamondback. What makes it so dangerous is that its venom is particularly virulent and has strong neurotoxic properties, such as cobra venom, in addition to the hemotoxic properties that vipers and pit vipers usually have. Some populations have an even stronger neurotoxin called Mojave toxin, and those in the area of the Chiricahuas are among those snakes. I would photograph more than 200 live rattlesnakes each year, and each Mojave was thoroughly enjoyed, well respected, and wrangled with caution. The third of the high desert species is the prairie rattlesnake. It isn't found in the Chiricahua foothills, but could be found nearby, 15 miles from Portal on the east side of Antelope Pass, of the Peloncillo Mountains near Animas, New Mexico and beyond. There also is a population of prairie and Mojave intergrades north of Portland Rodeo near another pass through the Peloncillos called Granite Gap. Moving into the mountains themselves, the banded rock rattlesnake is a personal favorite. These small buzztails live in very specific habitat, mostly rock slides and talus slopes among the oak woodland and pine oak woodland forests. They are active during the day and feed mainly on lizards. It is a protected species that unfortunately is poached in the chiricahuas, so I'll say no more about where they are found. Also fiercely protected both due to poaching and being crushed to death by people who attempt to find them on the famous talus slope that is no secret up at Barfoot Park, the twin-spotted rattlesnake is America's smallest species and is active at the highest elevation. You will see more of this snake later because it shares localities with my new species, the small montane sky island species that Brent and I discovered that will be named later this year and be forever associated with me. When our team searched for my new tarantula species in October 2019, we found 3 specimens of this secretive snake, and you will see that later. Finally, we come to my favorite snake in the world, the black-tailed rattlesnake. It is the most common rattlesnake in the Chiricahua Mountains and can be found from the foothills all the way up to the highest peaks. Higher elevation specimens tend to be more bright yellow than those at lower elevations. It is a gorgeous serpent and is remarkably calm for a rattlesnake. I have manipulated and posed and moved them for 20 minutes for photographic purposes without even them rattling their tails. But I admit that some have become much more agitated, and I've been struck at by some, just not nearly like diamondbacks, Mojaves, and prairies. This particular blacktail was found by Mark Pennell and I during his visit as I drove him up the mountain road to the site of my new tarantula species. At about 6,000 feet or 1,800 meters, we encountered this guy on the road in August. And here's a little video of me wrangling off the road for Mark before our photo session. Don't try this at home.
Well then, Mike.
But let's get back to spiders. Outside of tarantulas, my favorite arachnids are salticids, or jumping spiders. Macro photography is one of my interests, and this tiny jumper was only about 2 or 3 millimeters in length. This species is special because it is Habernatus geronimoi, named after the legendary Apache leader that lived in the area and surrendered to the US Army in 1886, ending the reign of these fierce warriors. This large jumper was one that Chad Campbell found when he first visited me in 2018. We found this up at Barfoot Park, which is famous for the twin-spotted rattlesnake, and you will hear more about when we talk about my new species. This salticid was found on a wooden post at about 8,300 feet, or 2,500 meters. Next we have Phidippus carneus, perhaps the most common of the 55 plus species of jumping spiders occurring in the Chiricahuas. Yes, you heard that right. There are more than 55 species of jumping spider in this mountain range. Finally, we have a personal favorite, Paraphydippus basalis, which I found most often in the bases of large agaves, also known as century plants. This species would help lead me to a serendipitous discovery of a female Aphonopelma chiricahua, the story of which I will tell soon. To show another spider that isn't a theraphosid, this is our largest huntsman spider, Oleos giganteus, and a favorite macrophotography subject of mine. And finally, we come to the wafer-lid trapdoor spider, Entochides arizonicus, which was found at my campsite during Mark and John Apple's visit. The Chiricahua Mountains are home to a handful of scorpion species, with many more being found in the foothills and surrounding desert. My favorite of my favorite range is Pseudo-Uroctonus apachicus, or apachianus rather. Here you see a young, freshly molted specimen, and here is the adult female. But let's return to tarantulas and tell the story of how I found the burrow of a female Aphonopelma chiricahua one hot day in June 2018. June is the hottest and driest month in the Chiricahuas, and I certainly did not expect to find a tarantula that day. But at this Wood Oakland site, on a plateau high above the primitive dirt road that leads from just before the Southwestern Research Station up to the highest peaks, I made an exciting discovery. Truth be told, I was after this, the banded rock rattlesnake, a favorite of herpers everywhere. I had climbed rock slides up the hill in search of this species, It was so hot and dry that I held out little hope, as these are most often seen when there is some humidity, such as after rains during the monsoon season. However, they get quickly agitated and buzz their tiny rattles when disturbed. This behavior backfires on them, as you can tap rocks with your walking stick and listen for the telltale sound of a snake hiding in the rocks. The rattle is so small that the buzz is more like the sound of a cicada, or a cicada as you say in the UK, than a rattlesnake, and you have to listen closely. But these snakes will alert you to their location if you are paying attention. Still, I had no luck finding them. But I just showed you this spider, Paraphidopus basalis, the agave-dwelling jumping spider. And just look at that face. This is the Palmer's agave that they can be found upon, but they will quickly disappear into the apex when you disturb them. The rigid leaves and sharp spines of this plant will slice your hands and arms to ribbons, so it is a tricky game trying to catch them to photograph. However, with no success with the rock rattlesnake, once I got to the oak grassland, oak forest plateau at the top of the steep hill, I switched to chasing these. As I moved from agave plant to the next, I followed a wildlife trail and kept my eyes moving from the ground to the trees for any reptiles or arachnids when I looked down and saw a silk-covered burrow. It was right here that I would find the first live female Aphonopelma chiricahua specimen that Brent or I knew about. And here is its silky lair. And then the spider's burrow with the silk wiped away. Here you see me trying to tickle her out while filming with my iPhone. I wasn't prepared for tarantula hunting, and the only water I had was a half a liter left in my drinking water bottle. I was going to have to use the water I could and hope for successful tickling, because I also didn't have digging tools. It was about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees centigrade, and sweat was dripping in my eyes as my heart pumped with excitement. Fortunately, I was able to coax her up to the burrow mouth, and eventually, using finesse tickling, following by a bit of brute force, I drove her out of the hole. She only had 7 legs, but I couldn't have been more overjoyed. I knew I was looking at the elusive female Aphonopelma chiricahua, something that nobody I knew had found. Again, the only female specimen used in the species description, which is the female paratype, had been collected in 1965, a year after I was born. And here she is again. I had no container to put her in, so I ended up scooping her into my stainless steel water bottle. Elated, I sprinted down the hillside and returned to my camp to celebrate and shower. It wasn't until a few hours later that I realized in all the excitement I had neglected to take the GPS coordinates, which I do using a Gaia GPS app on my iPhone. So I drove the few miles back to the area, again climbed the rocks and summited the hillside, and then it took me at least 30 minutes, if not an hour, to find the exact spot again to record the data. At last we come to the species that Brent and I discovered 4 specimens of on Halloween 2018, and our 2019 team found many more. Brent and Chris are currently working on the species description, and I am overjoyed about this spider and its publication in 2020. Here are Brent's fabulous images of first the female, and I have this photo as a mental print in my bedroom, and a photo of the male. The story of finding the species begins on the morning of the last of 3 days that Brent had spent with me in the Chiricahuas in late October. He had been on yet another extended field trip, spending most of the time alone searching for scorpions and tarantulas and sleeping in a tent as he covered area all over the Southwest. After leaving me in the Chiricahuas, he would be returning to his wife, pets, and Mississippi home. Brent and I had searched for more Aphonopelma chiricahua females with no luck, but had collected some males both near my camp in Cape Creek Canyon and near the Chiricahua National Monument on the other side of the range. On Brent's last morning, I had expected to search for more Aphonopelma chiricahua. However, he was so eager to get home after being on the road for some time that he asked me to instead just take him on one of my favorite hikes for the morning, with plans to start his drive eastward by midday. I decided to take him up to the top of the mountain, even though it was late October and it would be chilly above 8,000 feet. The trail I would take him to is above 9,000 feet or 2,700 meters, and here you see us high on that trail, where the views are breathtaking. We had a wonderful hike, and I drove him into Rustler and Barfoot Parks, which are the highest elevation camps and trailheads in the Chiricahuas. He had never seen them before, and we were having a blast. but eventually it was time to drive back down the mountain, grab some lunch, and send him on his way home. But as we began down the mountain and approached Onion Saddle, where the main Forest Service dirt road crests the mountain and descends Pinery Canyon on the other side towards the National Monument, Brent said, "I think I might have just seen a spider in the road." I put my truck in park, and sure enough, we had found a mature male in the road. The temperature was only about 45 degrees Fahrenheit or 7 degrees centigrade. And here you see Brent striding back to my truck for a container. We pulled the truck over and grabbed our bags and began to search the area. Within a short time, I had found another male a few feet up the roadside embankment and called Brent over. As he approached, I looked down and saw 2 pea-sized holes. They weren't covered by silk, but then it was damn cold and these spiders must be active during the warmth of day. The burrows were partially obscured by short wispy moss that was growing on the roadside shoulder. A little water down the holes, and eventually we had this gorgeous girl.
Wow. That's a pretty spider. Holy crap.
And this is the type locality of this new species. However, at the time, in the field, we didn't yet know it was a new species. We thought we had found a high elevation population of Aphonopelma chiricahua, especially since one of the 7 males that was used in the description of that species was found at high elevation, actually higher than where we were now. We began to talk about how these high elevation spiders with very short activity periods before the ground is covered in snow would likely be smaller than those at lower elevation. This mature female was very small compared to the Aphonopelma chiricahua I had found or any other Marxi-group species. However, you see the mossy roadside vegetation that somewhat obscured the burrows, and one of the burrows with everything swept away. Within about 30 minutes, we had 2 mature males, 1 mature female, and an immature specimen I believe was female, and they were all exceptionally beautiful. Here you see the forest spiders in film canister size vials. And another view of the dirt road at nearly 8,000 feet or 2,400 meters where the type locality is located. And this is the exact type locality. Imagine our surprise when a month or so later, Brent had completed the DNA analysis and other work on the spider to find that it was a new species more closely allied to Aphonopelma marxi than Aphonopelma chiricahua. We were extremely excited to know that we had discovered a new species in the Chiricahua Mountains. Here you see the burrow I found in mid-October 2019. I had been checking almost daily, waiting for the spiders to become active and unplug their retreats. This small mature specimen became the 5th collected, but it was actually usable for this description, and the immature found the previous year was not, so we were back to 4 specimens and needing more. As you can see, mature females can be quite small. I have huge hands, but that is a cute little spider. And here she is, photographed back at camp with proper gear. I continued to look for more whenever time would allow, but had no luck. But I knew within weeks Tom Patterson and Chad Campbell would arrive to help, and the following days Doctors Chris Hamilton and Brent Hendrickson would join us. Here you see my friends Tom and Chad, again photographed at that familiar vista you saw several times earlier. Tom would only be able to work in the Chiricahuas with us before he would push on alone to the Phoenix area to meet a friend, but Chad would stick with Chris and Brent and I to explore the Dragoon Mountains before heading home. And Wyatt Mendez would join us in the Chiricahuas and then meet up later with Chris and Brent at other ranges, while I would work the Galliero mountain range myself in November. I brought Tom and Chad to the type locality, but we didn't have any luck there, so I decided to move up higher elevation and check some other areas. I had taken Chad to Barfoot Park the previous year, remember that jumping spider I showed you that he found, and I wanted to check the barfoot hellespot, which is known for twin-spotted rattlesnakes and might also have my new species. As you can imagine, being a hellespot, it is a flat grassy plateau at the edge of the hillside where helicopters can safely land. We weren't there for long when Chad said he had found this mature male. I was so excited. We needed more specimens for the description. I didn't care if they were male. But I hadn't even gotten over to it when Tom said from nearby, "Snake." I knew that meant a twin-spotted rattlesnake, which here you see Chad chasing with his iPhone. And here is that gorgeous male of the new species and the stunning twin-spotted rattlesnake. We celebrated that night, and the next day Chris and Brent arrived in Chiricahuas. We all headed up the mountain where we were met by Wyatt Mendez. Again, at the left is Chad Campbell, a close friend of mine from Minnesota that many of you know from his spectacular photography and his online presence as Advan. He was a longtime moderator on arachnoboards. Next we have Dr. Chris Hamilton, now running his own lab at the University of Idaho. And next you have me and then Dr. Brent Hendrickson. Hey, at least Chris smiled. The rest of us don't look too excited. Next is Tom Patterson, known to just about every hobbyist from the arachnoboard days to today's Facebook. I was so glad he could make the trip and be part of this special new species. Finally is Chiricahua native Wyatt Mendez, American centipede expert turned into tarantula and scorpion enthusiast. He's also into herps, plants, ants, and everything, and is now in college in Tucson. I expect he will become an authority on centipedes and creepy crawlies. Again, we started at the type locality near Onion Saddle and didn't have much luck, although Chad found yet another twin-spotted rattlesnake that I took time to photograph. And nearby, Chris found this amazing folding trapdoor spider, Antrodietis apachicus. Brent's graduate work years ago included this genus, so both he and Chris have a special fondness for them. It was the first I had seen, and I was blown away and was fortunate to have time to set up my macro gear and capture this image. Next, we moved back up to the barfoot hellespot where Chad, Tom, and I had found the male the previous day. We had lunch first, and that's when Wyatt joined us. Then, before long, with a team of 6 searching, we uncovered a number of males and females of our new species. And also found our third twin-spotted rattlesnake in just 2 days. I couldn't have hoped for greater success with spider or snake. Later, we moved down to Oak Woodland near the Southwestern Research Station to search for Aphonopelma chiricahua. What we didn't know yet is that we would find spiders, but they would be a lower elevation population of the new species. In the field, you just collect specimens and collect data. It is later in the lab that identities truly become known. What we knew in the field, though, was that these were all small and mature, and that got us thinking that it might be the new species, even if some were in need of a molt and were a bit paler in color. Our team of 6 had great success in the Chiricahuas, and the next day we would move west. I broke camp and hauled my RV to Wilcox, Arizona, where I could easily reach the Dragoon Mountains and the Galliero Mountains, and we will get to those stories momentarily. But weeks later, after the guys had all gone home and I had returned to the Chiricahuas, I returned to our sites at the top of the mountain. Snow had begun to fall. Here you see the hellish spot where we had found the spiders and snakes warmed by the sun and dry, but snow is dusting the surrounding slopes. Another week later, this is what the type locality looked like. So this species is a very short activity window, less than 60 days, at least at these higher elevation sites. This slide is courtesy of Brent Hendrickson and will be part of the description of the new species. It shows not only the 5 sites where our team over 2 years had collected specimens, but also includes a 6th site called Long Rustler Park, where that one male that was lumped into the Aphonopelma chiricahua description is now known to be part of the new species. We will come back to this figure in a bit when I briefly mention the limitations of barcoding. But first, let's look at Brent's amazing images of this gorgeous new montane species. Here you see an adult pair in a natural setting. And here you see them in the studio with a size reference next to it being an American quarter. For UK viewers, our $quarter or 25-cent coin is just slightly larger than your 10-pence coin. Bear with me while I try to explain a little science and connect this presentation that ended the wonderful 2020 lectures with the incredible lecture that Emma Lawler began the afternoon with. She explained the usefulness of barcoding very well and illustrated its benefits. To put it simply, which honestly is all I can do, as I'm a naturalist, not a scientist, barcoding allows the use of small sequences of mitochondrial or maternal DNA, something like 600 to 1,000 base pairs, to identify species without the need for the full genome or nuclear gene. In short, it is quicker and cheaper. However, it does have its limitations. First, apologies for the quality of these figures. They are photos of computer screen that are courtesy of Brent Hendrickson and were supplied to me on short notice. Chris and Brent certainly use barcoding, that is, small sequences of mitochondrial DNA. In fact, it was used extensively by them in a few years prior to their 2016 Aphonopelma revision, for example, with their collaboration in 2013 on the turret-building species of the Mojave Desert. But it is useful in their hands because they know the genus so well that they can analyze and interpret the data to ensure that it makes sense. The same data might be accepted by those less familiar, but they can see when the results of using small sequences might be misleading or incomplete. So quickly, on the left you see the phylogenies resulting from small sequences of mitochondrial DNA. You don't need to review and understand it. If you really interest you, you will see these figures when the species is published. Instead, I want to show you what the mitochondrial or small sequence, aka barcoding data, would have led someone to believe. Going back to these 6 sites, using mitochondrial DNA and small numbers of DNA base pairs, the data suggested that the barfoot hellespot spiders at 2,493 meters were not as closely related to the nearby type locality spiders, shown here as Forest Road 42D, 2,364 meters, but rather more closely related to the 3 lower elevation sites on the left, along the Forest Road from 1,593 meters up to 1,717. In fact, the barcoding data suggested that was one species and the spiders from the type locality were another. Again, Chris and Brent have so much experience with American Aphonopelma and their DNA sequences, they questioned that and moved on to use the nuclear gene or full genome. Instead of somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 1,000 base pairs, a snippet really, they would be looking at hundreds of thousands of base pairs. And that brings us to a more clear-cut phylogeny that's on the right, and all the sites being one new species. You'll notice here that the species name is blocked out. For me to say it or write it ahead of publication would make it invalid. You'll just have to wait for it. So we will finish up now with other ranges that Team Skyline 2019 searched for new species. It is quite possible these images will also allow you a sneak peek at new species. We'll start with the Dragoon Mountains, and this, the first spider found there that I had the honor of uncovering. Tom Patterson had said his goodbyes after having an amazing time seeing the chiricahuas and sharing evening drinks with us. He had seen a new species and 3 twin-spotted rattlesnakes and much more. Wyatt wouldn't be joining us in the Dragoons, and while Chad and I moved my rig to Wilcox, Arizona, Chris and Brent headed up to the Peloncillo Mountains. On this map, you will see the Dragoons west of the Chiricahuas and the Peloncillos near Safford to the northwest. Chad and I met them later there that afternoon in the Peloncillos, but we didn't find anything there. So the next day, the 4 of us would hit the Dragoons, where the main camping area is called Cochise Stronghold. Once there, we split up and began to search. This range had been unsampled, and we didn't really know where to begin, but 4 experienced tarantula hunters will find a way. Before long, I had no idea where Brent and Chris were, and was walking alone when Chad came upon me. I told him I had found a spider and was just about to work on it. I had looked everywhere in the open for burrows with no success, so I started doing what herpers, that is, reptile hunters everywhere do. I flipped cover, and here the cover was rocks. I flipped a rock and saw a perfectly round hole with no silk. A little water poured into it and the shine of my flashlight, and I saw the furry legs I was looking for. Here at the bottom you see the rock, and at the top you see the rock off in the bottom left there as I found it along the trail. And here you see the hole beneath the rock. Here you're looking down upon the hole as I've just begun to scrape away to uncover the burrow. And here you see more of the earth removed. Remember, you're looking down from above, so I'm digging straight down alongside the rock that looks like it is below when it's just to the side. Eventually, some 10 to 15 minutes later, I am now getting between two immovable rocks and following the hole. The nice thing about pouring water into the dry earth, even if you do not successfully flush out the spider, is that you can follow where it is damp if you lose the tunnel during your digging and know which direction to go. And after some time, I had my spider. We returned to the campground where we had parked for lunch, and Chris was walking along some large ornamental boulders placed along the paved parking and camping area. Before this, when I had showed Brent the spider and told him how I had found it, he began to search other rocks in the area, flipping them over, looking for holes that are actually directly beneath boulders along the trail, and found more specimens. But we had now found a handful of specimens of this species, and we're decided to have lunch. So Chris is walking along in the parking lot area, and he sees a hole alongside a very large boulder, and we investigated and realized there was a spider. It took some work and a couple of guys to pull back the boulder, all the while hoping none of the campers would question our landscaping project, but we found a larger female and then noticed that there were a handful of spiderlings underneath where the rock had laid. And here is Brent's image of that spider. So, unfortunately, Chad had to go home to Minnesota, and Chris and Brent moved on, leaving me alone in Wilcox, Arizona. I needed some R&R and had planned to rest a bit and then explore the Galliero Mountains range alone. I had moved my rig to an RV park there. We knew a guy who had found a female tarantula in the Gallieros and had shared the GPS coordinates with us, and I would drive into the range and see what I could find when I had a free day. It was another range that Chris and Brent had yet to explore and hadn't been sampled by arachnologists. And as you can see from this photo, I had success. Here, returning to the map, you can see that the Gallieros are between the catalinas and the peloncillos, north of the dragoons, where Chris, Chad, Brent, and I had success the previous days. The drive to the site where a spider had been found was only about an hour from the RV park in Wilcox, where I was now camped. Here in some nice oak grassland, I would find several small spiders of what may yet be another new species. And here is the habitat I found them in. You can see that this is a burrow I had dug up. Flushing would reveal if there was a tarantula home and prevent you from spending time digging out a wolf spider, but I could never get them to come out completely just by flushing. Pouring water down the hole would bring the spiders to the burrow mouth briefly, but then they wouldn't come up again, and tickling would just scare them deeper into what I learned were very deep tunnels. But as I said, pouring water into the dry earth tells you exactly where the tunnel leads, and careful and patient digging would eventually get them out. As all specimens would be collected for science, there was no worry about rebuilding burrows or leaving them undisturbed, as is the standard practice on our international field trips where we're just collecting data, not spiders. Those field trips are about field research and catch and release. Our Sky Island field work and what we were doing in the Americas was about collecting specimens for science to uncover new species. Here you see Brent's photograph of one of the specimens that I would send to him. While I returned to Wilcox, Chris and Brent worked together in other ranges. The Mule Mountains, southwest of the Chiricahuas and along the Mexico border outside of Bisbee, Arizona, was one of their targets, and here you see Brent's image of the spider they found there. It will be interesting to see if this is a population of Aphonopelma madera or something new. Again, the Mule Mountains are near Bisbee, right on the Mexico border, west of the Chiricahuas and south of the Dragoons, east of the Huachuca Mountains. Here is the male, which looks just like every other Marxi-group mature male, to be fair. Chris and Brent also had success in the Rincon Mountains, at least in finding a mature male. As you can see on the map, the Rincons are just below the catalinas, and it may be that this spider is Aphonopelma catalina, a species that Wyatt would find more specimens of, and Chris and Brent returned to that range. Someone contacted me via iNaturalist and had a mature male, so I traveled to see him and ended up shipping that spider to Brent as well. Finally, we moved south to the whetstones where this spider was found. Is it a new species? We will see. As you can see, the whetstones are between the rincons to the north and the huachucas to the south, with the Santaritas to the west and the Dragoon Mountains to the east. So what's next? Well, the U.S. Sky Islands still require more work, and I expect our team and others will search other ranges in the coming years. But the Sky Islands of Mexico remain largely unsampled, and that seems to be where future workers should focus. Whether it will be Chris and or Brent, I don't know. It likely won't be me. You can see all the ranges below the border to search. How accessible and safe they are may be the biggest problem. But Brent's recent description of this spider from Mexico adds the first Mexican member to the Marxi-group, and that's a start. In closing, I appreciate anyone who made it this far listening to me. And again, thank Mark and Kim Pennell and the entire BTS committee and membership for making my live presentation possible and allowing me to release this video to you. I encourage you to visit the links in the description below and consider membership in the society, or at least sending a few quid or dollars via the donate link to thank them for allowing me to make this presentation featuring never-before-seen spiders. I am so excited about the description this year of this new species. I must also thank Dr. Chris Hamilton and especially Dr. Brent Hendrickson. Any mistakes I made in this presentation are my own and not theirs. I thank Brent for sharing images and figures and information for this presentation. It's a pleasure to spend time in the field with him and enjoy a few beers while talking about spiders. Brent shares a passion for photography, and it's also fun when he and I turn our lens to landscapes instead of arachnids. So follow him on social media using the link in the description to see his beautiful photography. I encourage you all to visit the incredibly diverse state of Arizona, both the desert seas and the mountain islands. It has so much to offer. I mentioned in my live lecture to a primarily British audience that even most Americans just think of hot, dry Sonoran Desert when they picture Arizona. It actually has more mountain ranges than mountainous states in the Rockies like Montana. Explore it for yourself. Thanks for listening. Check out my website for more, including downloads of my publications, my YouTube videos, my blog, and much more. And if you enjoy my photography, give me a follow on Instagram at Jacobi Pics. Thanks, y'all.